Hi guys, welcome to our lecture. I apologize if this is really echoey. This is what we're working with today. This is our lecture on biotechnology and genetics, specifically GMOs. So make sure you're having the right note sheet. And they look like guided notes. They're not doodle, no picture. And this should be the next thing you have in your notebook after today's or Tuesday's activity. So let's get started right now. So an analogy, we've done a whole mini lecture on DNA, so some of these words should sound familiar to you, but we're going to kind of do a comparison between DNA and the English language. So what is DNA? DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, which means that or that's not what it means. That's coding for the chemical structure, but that's not as important as to know that it is basically like an instruction or a blueprint for either a cell or a complete organism in some cases. So it is the blueprint for whatever it is. So if it's us, we actually have all of our DNA for every single one of us in each of our cells, whether the specialty of the cell depends on whether or not we're showing those genes, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. What you need to know is that it's basically a blueprint for whatever cell it's in. So we're kind of breaking them down. It gets larger as you go this way. So DNA is made of nucleotides. We talked about this. A, T, C, and G. Adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Those are like the building blocks of our DNA. We have a phosphate sugar backbone, but that doesn't matter as much. What does matter, though, is the A, T, C, and G and how they're ordered and how many of them are on our DNA segments. That's similar in the English language to the pencil lines that when you're writing something. So this would just be like the little pencil lines. And then 3 sets of nucleotides make up a codon. And that codon codes for an amino acid, which is actually a protein, which is how we make the things. But that's kind of like in the English language, our letters. So just as the pencil lines make up the different letters, nucleotides are going to make up the different codons. And then we're getting just a little bit larger, so a bunch of codons actually make up a gene. So genes are larger than codons. We're getting larger, I told you that. And the different codons make up the different genes. Similarly, in our English language, the letters make up different words, right? Like D-O-G is dog, C-A-T is cat. Each of those has a letter, C-A-T. The letters, if you go even smaller, you've got the pencil lines of the individual letters as well. So we're getting larger still, so a bunch of genes make up what we call a chromosome. They're a bundle of genes pretty much. There's a different structure. Sometimes when they're just hanging out in the cell, they look like spaghetti. When it's time to start duplicating the cell, they look more like our X's that we see, X's. And then in the English language, what we would kind of associate as chromosomes, a little bit larger than words, are chapters. So books have different chapters in them, right? And then our very last, our largest, is called a genome. So we talked about and thrown around the words a little bit about like the human genome and when it was discovered or kind of fully written out. That would be like a book in the English language, so that would have everything in it. Genomes are really large. I can't tell you exactly how long ours is, but I do know, this feels right, but it might not be. I think it took about 3 years for us to completely code our human genome. It was very long. It was a long endeavor. So humans and dogs have about 84% of the same genes. What that means is that dogs and humans have about 84% of the same words in their instruction book. So we talk about how similar organisms are based on what percent of their genes are the same. The closest animal that we do have in our genes would be the chimpanzee. We are only different by just a teeny tiny tip of a chromosome is how different we are, or our genome is from chimpanzees. So getting into that though, you need to know that so that you can fully understand what a GMO is. But GMO stands for genetically modified organisms. We've talked about them in class. We've talked about them just in general when we're debating and learning more about biotechnology. But to break it down a little bit more word for word, genetically refers to genes. Genes are made up of DNA, which is a set of instructions for how cells develop and grow. You know that. They're kind of like a blueprint. They tell the molecule, what exactly to build, where to build it, and how quickly to build it. Second word in GMO is modification. This implies that some change or tweak has been made, right? If you modify your hairstyle, you change your hairstyle. If you modify a car or something, you've changed it. You modify an assessment, you change it just a little bit. And then the last word that we've got in our GMO is organisms. That's a pretty easy one. That's any living thing, all living things. Bacteria, from the smallest of the bacteria to the largest of us, or even larger, the African elephant. We're all organisms. Typically, when we think of GMO, we think of them in terms of crops because we often genetically modify crops. But I'm here to tell you, and I need you to know, that that's not all that we genetically modify, or we have the ability to. Why in the world would we ever want to modify an organism? Isn't it great the way we've made it? Maybe, but here's some reasons why scientists have decided they need to modify organisms. In terms of plants, we want them to be resistant to drought. Maybe this become resistant to drought. This becomes more and more important as we have we have drastic changes in our climate. It's getting warmer, we're experiencing not only more droughts in areas, but we're also experiencing, more natural disasters like hurricanes, wildfires. They are becoming more and more prevalent. As the climate continues to change, they're only going to continue to get worse. But that's a topic for another day. We're just talking about the resistance to drought. So I want a plant that's going to be able to make it through drought. I want a plant that if I spray herbicides, aside is a killer. So if I spray plant killers on my plant, I would like it to be resistant. It's not going to do me much good if I'm a farmer and I have sprayed my crops with herbicide and then they die. That's not going to do me any good. My plants are dead and I have no money nor food. So we want them to be resistant to herbicides. Most of our corn is already resistant to herbicides. What is it called? Roundup Ready corn is what it's called. Monsanto's has the patent for it, right? So you can spray as much Roundup as you would like on the plant and it will not die. And we'd also maybe like them to be resistant to pests, although pets too. They've got like a beetle on them. We don't want my beetle eating my crop because then it's not going to grow. So we want them to be resistant to that. I would like to also build a plant that's tolerant to a wider range of weather conditions. Told you as the climate modify, things are getting crazy and maybe a region that doesn't experience like snow or something gets snow. Crazy, right? You wouldn't think with global warming, but it happens because weather is odd. And then I would like to also increase the nutrients in my plant because I want to have more nutrients by eating that plant. So maybe I want to pump it full of vitamin C or vitamin D or whatever nutrient we might be deficient in. We're going to try to put that more of it in our crop. And then lastly, we want it to last longer after harvest, aka we want it to preserve. We use chemicals all the time and preservatives for lots of our food, but we want to specifically try to take that out. We maybe want it to have a longer shelf life, right? So maybe it takes 2 weeks for my tomato to rot instead of just 1 week. That would be our goal. 64 countries adopted biotechnology crops since 1996, the year I was born. 24 countries are planting, and 43 are importing biotech crops. So we are planting them, and countries like Russia are importing them. In Italy, geography, not that good. That's Mr. Connor for you. And Egypt are importing. We have countries like Chile and the Latin American countries, that's Mexico. Mexico and some of the Latin American countries and Central American countries are also planting these GMOs as well. So one thing that comes up when we talk about GMOs are some commonly misconstrued thoughts, right? Some misconceptions. So I wanted to clear up a couple, and this is where we're going to actually end our lecture today once we go through all of these. And if you'd like to know more, each of them kind of has a little link, and I can tell you or support so that you know I am not fibbing you. It is actual science, whether these are fact or fiction. So my very first one, fact or fiction. GMOs are created by injecting chemicals into food after it's harvested. This is actually fiction. So this is something I thought. This was so common of a misconception that I thought that's what it was. I actually thought that we radiated the plants and that's what a GMO was. That's how bad of a perception I had of GMOs. That's not true. So GMOs are developed through genetic engineering where scientists identify and insert specific traits into the DNA of the seed before it's ever even planted. The plant grows just like a conventional or non-GMO seed. The transgenic trait, or the one that we want to transfer, the transgenic trait, or the one that we are trying to create, is transferred to other varieties through traditional crossbreeding, which we do all the time. We've been doing that for a really long time. Fact or fiction, after GMO is developed, it is thoroughly evaluated by the USDA, FDA, and EPA, so Environmental Protection Agency, Federal Department of Agriculture, and U.S. Department of Agriculture. I think the FDA might be Federal Drug Administration, might actually be what that stands for. Okay, so to identify unintended consequences to the environment or to our health if consumed. So this is actually true. So it takes many, many years for GMO to be applied or approved, first for field testing and second for commercial products. So the very first thing we do is we test this GMO. Is it going to be harmful to the environment as we plant it? And then secondly, is it going to be harmful to anybody who ingests it? So there is a lot of thought and planning into these GMOs. It's not just like mad scientists going crazy and then selling the product. So we have some regulatory agencies on there. If I purchase food labeled with a USDA organic seal, I know that these products did not grow from a GMO seed. True or false? This is actually fact. In addition to other growth production requirements, food with an organic seal were not grown with GMO seeds. This is incredibly true. My family is actually organic blueberry farmers, so they have the other growth restrictions are they have so many requirements that say you can't do this or you can do this. Like we can't have any kind of animals on our farm. Like I really wanted a horse out there. Wasn't allowed because you can't have it on an organic farm. You can't put certain chemicals on it. So GMOs are not allowed as well with those strict requirements. Fact or fiction, GMOs have bombarded the produce section of the grocery store. It's difficult to avoid when GMO fruits and vegetables. This is super false. So there are only 10 approved varieties of GMO plants. Of those crops, 5 could be found in the produce section. There's sweet corn, papayas, potatoes, squash, and the Arctic apple. So if you're going to the grocery store and any vegetable you pick up you think is a GMO, that's not true. And even if you do pick up sweet corn or papaya, if they are genetically modified, it's most likely, no, they won't be labeled. If they are not genetically modified, it'll have a USDA organic sign, but you also might be eating a non-GMO. It just kind of depends on the corn that you pick up. But the moral of the story here is that there aren't very many fruits and vegetables that you would actually ingest that are genetically modified. Health studies about the safety of consuming GMO crops are less than 30 years old. This is actually true. So GMO crops have only been in production since 1996. So I told you that's the year I was born, 24 years ago. While studies have shown they are safe, their scope is limited to the amount of time they've been used in production. So when people say that GMO crops might have harmful effects in the future, they might, because it takes a long time to gather scientific evidence and data. We've learned about that. So we might not know the studies right now. They're showing that they're safe, but does that mean necessarily that there won't be one in the later years? Nope. So it's okay. We'll find out. GMOs are not directly linked to being a cause for cancer. This is fact. They pose no great risk for increasing your risk of cancer. Than their conventional counterparts. There's the research on that. And our very last one that I have to squeeze in because my time's almost out. There aren't any known environmental risks to producing and growing GMO crops. This is actually false. So there are some potential environmental risks known which lead to monitoring and testing before approval of new GMO crops. We talked about that. Scientists monitor GM crops to watch for unintended consequences. We will talk about that more